VenomousStare back with another StarCraft commentary. This time we have my favorite Terran player in StarCraft 2, the Korean Innovation, in the bottom left, facing off against the Korean Macro Zerg Jin Rogue, who Artosis described as one of the most abusive Zergs he's ever seen. This guy will get down and dirty, and that doesn't necessarily mean that he's a cheeser or that he is an aggressive player, but Swarm Host Nidus, Roach Ravager Bust, the sort of dirty mid-game centric Zerg tricks that a lot of Zerg players sort of shy away from, this guy is not afraid to do. Stuff that would be considered sort of flavor of the month or maybe even gimmicky by some people, Rogue would not only do it, but he would master it, and he would do it shamelessly. So runs counter to a guy like Idra or a guy like Cyril, who is more of a pure macro player. Notice he gets 16 guys on minerals, makes the pool and the gas before it, and then all of his workers that he makes will go into gas once he makes them. Some players will like to micro their workers like this, others will just catch them as they come out, or manually right click them. We can make the egg and then right click them into the geyser, as opposed to doing the rally point from the hatch itself. Natural about to be done for the Zerg player as Innovation is going for the tried and true, seen it a million times, can spend an entire 30 seconds talking about the incredibly mundane aspects of the early game Reaper Expand. And let's be real, folks, nothing is going to happen here, so let's kick it in to a little bit of hyperspeed, because we all know what's going to happen. The forlings are going to come out, no damage is going to be done, and the macro players do their thing, and everything as normal. So Starport on the way here, as well as the third CC from Inno, and he is going for Hellions. The reason that Hellions are standard versus Zerg is to see Jin Rogue reaching 16 workers at his natural, and the Reaper's just going to run in here and scout, no damage being done. Misclick. There you go, just the Reaper. And the Hellions are going to range out here. We'll kick it back down to normal speed. But really, if we look at the core mechanics of Macro Zerg versus Terran, they're really trying to get that 3 base mineral saturation. That's what they're really rushing towards. That is the object of almost every single Macro Zerg build. Get up to that 60 to 66 drone 3 base saturation. And Zergs like Cyril and Raynor have really made a career off of figuring out the best way to rush up to that number safely as possible. And we can see Innovation is going for Banshee. And in the same way that Zerg is doing everything they can to reach up to that magical number, we see the Terrans doing everything they can to limit Zerg's growth. Mass drone coming, as well as Spire and Spores here. Raven is on the way for Inno, who is building more barracks and will go into bio. And he's building a Raven off of the Banshee. And if we click on upgrades here, it's not a cloaked Banshee. So he's actually doing a build that is very fun to do, and Innovation sort of created and popularized, which is he goes 6 to 8 Hellions. It's a very greedy build. He goes 6 to 8 Hellions with a Raven and uses that for map control. Sometimes he skips the Banshees and makes 2 extra Hellions. It just goes straight into the Raven if he's being super greedy, but this is the more macro-focused version, and the version that packs more of a punch and a threat. If I were you, a Terran player at home, and I wanted to copy this build, I would certainly incorporate the Banshee, even if you were going to skip Cloak like Inno. It just throws a big wrench in Zerg's plan. And the Raven is just such a huge asset. We hear Terran players talk about ad nauseum how powerful the mule is and how they can't afford to give up a single mule to scan and see what their opponent's doing. Yet they'll blow 50 scans clearing creep. This is an opening that, if you think about it, the Raven pays for itself within a few tumors being killed. Because if you can save those scans, as Terran players have so often told us, whenever they're told, well, of course you can just scout by scanning. What do you mean you can't scout? You have scan, LOL. This is really the intelligent thing to do, I think, versus Zerg, and something that I have always thought is good, and we see mutas coming out now as not a lot was going on. Inno took his third, he's taking gas, 1-1 on the way, combat shields. I haven't pedantically been pointing this all out because it's just so standard. The Raven might die, Inno gets the couple of auto turrets out, but no mutas die. We saw a few, maybe like a couple years ago, the Raven got a big buff and the auto turret became a lot more powerful, and Terran players started just opening with the Raven as though it was a Banshee, and they would just rush to their opponent's mineral line and throw a turret down. That's not really the same sort of Raven opener that we saw just then, and not the same sort of Raven opener I think is powerful. 1-1 on the way for Rogue. Crucially, Rogue elected to rush these mutas out and get map control. Very frequently, Zergs will have to make a linear choice whenever they're facing Bio-Terran. Do I rush out mutas and get map control and delay my 1-1 and my Bane speed and make me weaker early on, which is what Rogue did? Or do I very safely go into 1-1 and focus on an army that can brawl very effectively with Terran and delay my mutas in favor of a mass drone style, mass Queen Ling Bane defense? This is the sort of style favored by DRG, an old school Zerg that we see re-rising to prominence in the GSL as recently as last season. And a Widowmine trap intelligently limits what the Zerg player can do, and whenever you play against Mutiling Baneling, this is one of the things that you want to aim to do, is you want to get mines, you want to get the mine upgrade, and you want to set mine traps, because this is actually something that can cause huge swings in the game, whether it be versus Ling armies, versus Bane armies, or versus Muta harassment. And sometimes the hits can be inconsequential like we just saw, but even when the hits are inconsequential, they can stop counter harassment and stuff like this. So notice these two mines out here. Because there's so many mutas, they could get sniped, but see, we do see a mine shot does go off even though Overseers wore out and Rogue was watching his army. A couple of changelings go down. Inno is just so good and so crisp that he's always going to kill those, but if you're in Masters League or below, spamming changelings and using them to scout your opponent's base, putting them in spots like here at the natural, or shift-clicking them around their main, or just right-clicking them on their army, that's an incredibly potent, lethal tactic, and a tactic that will just get you such an insane amount of scouting info, as it looks like Innovation is trying to press up north and clear the towers, but Mutiling Baneling is going to come in as those mines in the middle were cleaned up. And Inno sort of has his Marines in his hands, so to speak, as he's caught out in the middle of the map, third base vulnerable, and Inno is probably going to just try to counter push as he brings the rest of his army back that was up on the northwest side, and a Thor is out, thankfully, and that's going to limit a lot of the damage that can be done by the mutas. Inno leading with the Hellbats. Banes could come in. We need to see splits here from Inno, and the Banes do die, and the mutas, even though they killed some SCVs, it looks like they will be repelled. A Widowmine is out here. Inno really needs to focus this base. Oh, and he has to run away. That's actually really bad, because Inno desperately needed to limit the production of a Zerg who is just running wild here with tons of creep. But Inno's already at the front door. Remember, he does have these bases mining. He has stabilized. He's getting some bio mine down, and the key here is for the Thors to shoot the mutas and for Inno to really hit before the Zerg gets 2-2. 2-2 was delayed for the Zerg because it went for quick mutas, and speed Banes are going to come forward and be wasted on the Marauders. That's big for Rogue, although Rogue is still up in supply, and Rogue is still sort of flirting with the counterattack, but Inno is not going to really take damage. He has mines there, and Thor shot could absorb a lot of damage here, and the Thor does go down because Inno was focused on the main. No Thor in the main as Inno is retreating the Thor back into his main, and Inno is going to run and get huge shots on the Banes, but whenever your production is gutted and you lose this much mining income and suddenly you have to retreat from a map with a huge rush distance, the mutas have served their purpose. You know, they didn't come in and do game-ending damage or kill 15 add-ons, but the fact that this army had to retreat is really going to be really hard to come back from for Inno. Love this hidden link here, Zerg players. You should be aiming to copy this maneuver. And because the Zerg player Rogue used incredible amounts of guile and multitasking to force his Terran opponent to have to retreat. He was able to consistently spread creep, get a lot of drones up, and maintain a macro advantage despite not being able to keep up in upgrades. And keep in mind, it was a linear decision. He favored to get those mutas, which allowed him to do those things. It wasn't like he fucked his macro up and simply made a mistake, and that's why his upgrades were behind. And these upgrades are at risk of dying if Inno really pushes here, and the upgrades of Inno are going to be caught out here. And with the mutas right there having +2 upgrades, they're not going to be able to fend it off, and the +2 does finish, which is absolutely huge, because Mutaling Baneling, as we see the mutas come in, and Inno really needs to focus fire. Banelings are going to roll in here. Innovation trying to split back into the corner as all the drones going down on that base. Innovation does lose his army, but notice this base did get cleaned up despite the spines. And Inno will lose the forward encroaching bio. And notice the Zerg player still is up ahead in supply. And Inno is just desperately trying to hold this forward base. And this is a textbook scrappy Zerg versus Terran, lots of back and forth, lots of hefty splash damage heavy engagements where bases get heavily damaged. And Innovation is going to fly up north here and see what he can get done. He really needs to shut down this Zerg on this vast map, because Rogue is teching into Hive, he's getting his 3/3s, getting his Ultra Cavern. The Mind Drop does die despite doing a lot of damage to mutas, and the clock is ticking for Innovation, who's very quickly running out of steam. The Zerg players at a staggering 95 drones on a big map with lots of creep spread, tacking into Hive. The Zerg is in a phenomenal defensive posture. Innovation is really going to have to break him here because of the imminent Hive tech. Innovation really doesn't have the ability to produce enough units to break the Zerg here. He does have one measly upgrade advantage, and Thor being focused here, the inability for Innovation to retain Thors due to lack of bio reinforcements is really the crux of why he lost this game, and that has more to do with muta harassment than any sort of macro error that Innovation made, obviously. So Mutaling Baneling is going to come in here, huge damage there on the Marines, and Inno's going to try to just really focus the mutas here and do what he can, as he's starting to press down on the bottom as well. And Inno really is starting to break the Zerg player here, as Rogue really hit a power trough, and because these corner bases were so severely damaged, he ran out of income right whenever he was trying to tech into Ultras, which is an extremely notorious power trough for Zerg. And notice Inno had that +3 attack kit right whenever he did his attack, which made the really poor timing of the attack as far as Rogue's perspective be even worse, because that +3 bio really sings, man. It hits hard. And now Inno can just spam back and forth, taking advantage of the lack of mutas, and just this is another classic Terran old school micro tactic where you drop Marauders on top of Banelings one at a time. Just incredibly cost efficient in Rogue GG. So I'm going to be casting some more of these games from this series. I think it's a best of 5. If you guys want to sub and like, don't worry, more StarCraft videos are on the way.